Have you ever wondered how one of the most incredible civilizations in history managed to thrive for over 3,000 years? Seriously, we're talking about Egypt, a place where pharaohs ruled, massive pyramids were built, and mummies became rock stars. But the most fascinating thing isn't just how they did it, it's how they kept doing it for millennia. Imagine holding on to power, culture, and influence for 3,000 years without losing your spark. That's like trying to keep a playlist going for an entire road trip, but without the dreaded battery low warning. The Pre-dynastic period, c. 2500 to 3100 BCE. Before we had the iconic pyramids and the powerful pharaohs, Egypt started as a collection of humble farming communities along the Nile River. It wasn't all gold and grandeur just yet, just good old farmers working the land. But the Nile? Oh, it was more than just a river. It was like Egypt's personal highway, connecting different regions and providing fertile land in an otherwise dry landscape. It's like having a massive water park in the middle of the desert, every farmer's dream. During this pre-dynastic period, Egypt wasn't yet one big united empire. Instead, it consisted of two distinct regions: Upper Egypt, Southern Egypt, and Lower Egypt, Northern Egypt near the Delta. These regions had their own local rulers and cultures. But of course, where there's a will and a lot of fertile land, there is a way. Egypt was eventually going to become something bigger, something unified. Enter the legendary King Narmer, also known as Menes, who is credited with uniting these two regions around 3100 BCE. Imagine the drama of this moment. Two regions, each with its own identity and power, suddenly merging into one big, glorious Egyptian empire. It was like the greatest crossover episode in history, only with more hieroglyphics and fewer commercial breaks. Narmer's unification didn't just change the political landscape, it marked the beginning of Egyptian civilization as we know it. From this point forward, Egypt would move away from small, fragmented communities and evolve into a centralized kingdom ruled by one pharaoh. The first dynasty of Egypt was born, and the groundwork for thousands of years of powerful rulers and mind-blowing monuments was laid. Talk about setting the stage. The Age of the Pyramids, c. 2686 to 2181 BCE. All right, so now that Egypt is united, it's time to level up. And by level up, we mean massive stone structures and unbelievable architectural feats. Welcome to the Old Kingdom, where Egypt's pharaohs decided they needed more than just grand palaces, they wanted pyramids. Big ones, like really big ones, the kind that still leave us scratching our heads wondering how they did it. This period is famously known for the construction of the pyramids of Giza, including the Great Pyramid built for Pharaoh Khufu, also known as Cheops. Picture this. You've got hundreds of thousands of laborers, an unimaginable amount of stone blocks, and an engineering feat so mind-blowing that it stands as the only remaining wonder of the ancient world. I mean, if you ever thought assembling IKEA furniture was hard, try building a 481-foot-tall pyramid using tools from 4,500 years ago. The Great Pyramid alone took about 20 years to complete, and it was the tallest man-made structure in the world for over 3,800 years. Talk about ambitious. But it wasn't just Khufu. Pharaohs like Djoser and Sneferu also made significant contributions to pyramid building, with the Step Pyramid of Djoser being the first of its kind. It's like they were the architects of the ancient world, creating the blueprint for the empire's future glory. But pyramids weren't the only thing getting built. The Old Kingdom saw the establishment of a highly organized, centralized government. The pharaohs weren't just divine kings, they were essentially the center of everything: religion, politics, and economy. A bit like modern-day CEOs, only with the added bonus of being gods. Pharaohs ruled with the help of an efficient bureaucratic system. They had viziers, think of them like royal advisors or managers, priests who were the gatekeepers of Egyptian spirituality, and a group of scribes who kept track of everything. Yes, including all that grain and livestock. No wonder Egypt stayed so organized for thousands of years. But the higher you rise, the harder you fall. The Old Kingdom, with all its grandeur and monumental achievements, eventually entered a phase of decline. By around 2181 BCE, Egypt was in what historians called the First Intermediate Period, a time marked by weak pharaohs, internal strife, and economic difficulties. It was like a vacation in the sun that went a little too long before they realized they ran out of money and sunscreen. Egypt's unity was fractured, and regional rulers began to take control, each with their own agendas. This period saw local dynasties in Upper and Lower Egypt, with the pharaoh's power dwindling in the face of rival factions. But it turns out, this was only a temporary setback. A new pharaoh would rise, and Egypt would regain its strength. Sometimes it just takes one person with a lot of ambition to turn the tide. Cue the Middle Kingdom, Egypt's comeback tour. C. 2055 to 1650 BCE. Mentuhotep II of the 11th dynasty is the hero of this story. After decades of fragmentation, he managed to reunite Egypt, restoring central authority and bringing much-needed stability. Think of it like a sports team with a losing streak that suddenly hires a new coach who gets the team back in shape and wins the championship. The Middle Kingdom was marked by a renewed sense of order and prosperity, along with an expansion of the empire. The military went on campaigns in Syria, Palestine, and Nubia. Egypt wasn't just defending its borders, it was building them, establishing dominance in the surrounding regions. The Egyptian army was leaner, meaner, and ready for action. The Middle Kingdom wasn't all about fighting wars and expanding borders, though. It also saw a cultural renaissance, with the rise of literature, art, and monumental architecture. Pharaohs like Amenemhat II and Senusret III built impressive temples and pyramid complexes, and Egypt's famous literary works like The Story of Sinuhe became a major part of the cultural legacy. Egypt wasn't just an empire, it was a hub of culture and creativity. The Middle Kingdom also saw the flourishing of Egypt's economy, with improvements in trade, agriculture, and infrastructure. As the Nile's floodwaters became more predictable, the country's agricultural output increased, allowing Egypt to develop a more robust economy. And let's not forget, Egypt was still pretty famous for its gold. The wealthy Egyptians even began to develop more luxury items, which we can still admire today in museums. Lucky us.
Hold on tight, because we're about to enter Egypt's golden age, the New Kingdom. Think of it as Egypt's version of the peak of rock stardom. If the Old and Middle Kingdoms were a successful band with a solid fan base, the New Kingdom was the time when they went mainstream and went on world tours. This was the era of the pharaohs who would become legends: Hatshepsut, Thutmose III, Akhenaten, Tutankhamun, and of course the famous Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great. Now, the New Kingdom wasn't just about being a superstar, it was about empire building. Egypt's influence spread far beyond its borders. With pharaohs like Thutmose III, Egypt became a military superpower, dominating lands from the Levant to Nubia. They weren't just defending their land, they were expanding and controlling vital trade routes, which brought in wealth and power. Egypt wasn't just a regional power anymore, it was an empire that could rival anyone in the ancient world. Let's start with one of the most fascinating figures in Egyptian history, Hatshepsut, the woman who ruled like a king. In a world dominated by men, Hatshepsut didn't just sit back and let the men do the ruling. She took the throne as the pharaoh. Hatshepsut's reign, c. 1479 to 1458 BCE, is a prime example of Egypt at the height of its cultural power. She was responsible for massive building projects, most notably her mortuary temple at Deir el-Bahari, which is still admired for its architectural brilliance. She also established important trade routes, including the legendary expedition to Punt, modern-day Somalia, which brought back exotic goods such as myrrh, ebony, and incense, a true sign of her international influence. But let's not get too comfortable, because here comes Akhenaten, the pharaoh with the unconventional ideas. Akhenaten, who ruled from c. 1353 to 1336 BCE, shocked everyone by trying to push monotheism in a society that had worshipped many gods for centuries. He introduced the worship of Aten, the sun god, and even moved the capital from Thebes to a new city, Akhetaten, modern-day Amarna. This religious upheaval didn't go over well with the priests of Egypt's traditional gods like Amun and Ra. And guess what? After Akhenaten's death, the new pharaohs quickly rolled back these changes. His successors, including his famous son Tutankhamun, restored the traditional gods and brought Egypt back to its roots. Speaking of Tutankhamun, yes, that Tut, his story is nothing short of legendary. Tutankhamun, the boy king who ascended the throne at the tender age of 9, might not have been the most powerful pharaoh in history, but he's probably the most famous. Why? Thanks to his tomb, which was discovered in 1922 by Howard Carter. It was full of treasures that gave us an incredible glimpse into Egypt's wealth and artistry. And let's be honest, who doesn't love a good mummy mystery? Despite his short reign, he died at around 18. Tut became one of Egypt's most famous figures thanks to that glittering tomb. Now, if there's one pharaoh that really captured Egypt's grand legacy, it's Ramses II, also known as Ramses the Great. His reign, c. 1279 to 1213 BCE, lasted for an astounding 66 years, making him one of Egypt's longest reigning pharaohs. Ramses led military campaigns into Syria, battled the Hittites in the famous Battle of Kadesh, and constructed monumental temples, including the Abu Simbel temples carved into a mountainside. His face is literally etched into history. He made sure his image appeared everywhere, from statues to monumental inscriptions. Ramses was the embodiment of pharaohly power. Aside from military victories and architectural feats, the New Kingdom was also a cultural golden age. Egypt's wealth from conquest and trade supported the flourishing of arts, literature, and science. Papyrus was used extensively, allowing for the spread of knowledge, while monumental temples like Karnak and Luxor were constructed to honor the gods. The art and writing from this period, especially from the reign of Ramses II, are some of the most well-preserved examples of ancient Egyptian culture. Egypt wasn't just conquering, it was creating and inspiring. As all empires know, the golden years never last forever, and even Egypt wasn't immune to the tides of history. By the end of the New Kingdom, things started to unravel. Egypt, once a thriving military empire, began to face external threats that even the pharaohs couldn't ward off. This is when the Sea Peoples came onto the scene, wreaking havoc across the Mediterranean. Who were they? Where did they come from? No one really knows, but they were like the ancient version of a bad neighbor who throws parties at 3 a.m. and breaks everything, in sight. Their raids contributed to Egypt's weakening hold over its empire, and it didn't help that Egypt's internal power structure was becoming increasingly unstable. Meanwhile, inside Egypt, things weren't much better. The central power of the pharaoh began to wane. Successive rulers became less able to hold the empire together, and internal strife became more common. It's like a kingdom without a strong leader, where everyone starts thinking they could do a better job. Pharaohs who followed Ramses II, despite their best efforts, couldn't hold Egypt's vast territories together. As central authority weakened, local rulers or vassal kings began to assert more independence. On top of this, Egypt's external enemies took advantage of the chaos. First, the Libyans from the west started pushing into Egypt, making it even harder for the already weakened military to defend the empire. But it didn't stop there. Nubians to the south also took advantage of Egypt's declining power. For the first time in Egypt's history, the Nubians would not only raid Egypt, they would eventually rule it during the 25th dynasty, known as the Nubian dynasty. It's like Egypt's throne was up for grabs and people from all over started to take their shot. By the time the Assyrians and Persians came onto the scene, Egypt's military was too depleted to fight them off. The Assyrians began invading in the 8th century BCE, and after a series of invasions, Egypt was no longer the dominant empire it once was. Fast forward a few more centuries, and Egypt eventually became a satellite state under the control of the Persians around 525 BCE. So what happened? Well, a combination of factors led to Egypt's decline: a weakened military, internal strife, and the invasions of external powers. Egypt had once been an empire that could resist invaders, but by the time of the Sea Peoples and later the Persians, it had lost much of its strength. Even though Egypt still had a rich cultural legacy and remained important in the ancient world, it was no longer the towering empire it once was. After Egypt's fall to the Persians in 525 BCE, Egypt entered a period of foreign domination. First, it was the Persians, and they made Egypt a province of their vast empire. It wasn't exactly a happy marriage. Egypt had been ruled by pharaohs for over 3,000 years, and now they were under the thumb of foreign overlords. Egypt still had its temples, its gods, and its culture, but its political independence was diminished. The Persian Empire under Cambyses II invaded Egypt and kept it under control, although there were several uprisings by the Egyptians who weren't too thrilled about this new arrangement. Despite the Persian rule, Egypt was still strategically important to the Persians, who valued its wealth, its agriculture, especially grain, and its strategic position between the Mediterranean and Africa. But Egypt never lost its deep cultural roots. The Egyptian priesthood remained powerful, and the ancient traditions carried on, even if the pharaohs were now just a distant memory.
Then came the legendary Alexander the Great, and he, of course, didn't want Egypt to be left out of his empire-building plans. In 332 BCE, Alexander defeated the Persian forces and took control of Egypt without much resistance. The Egyptians, perhaps tired of foreign rule, welcomed him as a liberator, and he was crowned pharaoh. During his reign, Alexander founded the city of Alexandria, which would go on to become one of the most famous cultural and intellectual centers of the ancient world. But after Alexander's death, his empire was divided among his generals. Egypt went to Ptolemy I, one of Alexander's former generals, and thus began the Ptolemaic dynasty. This dynasty was of Greek origin, and it ruled Egypt for nearly 300 years. The Ptolemies, particularly Cleopatra VII, were known for their political savvy, their alliances with Roman figures like Julius Caesar and Mark Antony, and for maintaining Egypt's position as a cultural powerhouse. However, the Ptolemaic dynasty also faced its challenges, including the growing influence of Rome, which eventually led to Egypt's absorption into the Roman Empire. After Cleopatra's defeat by the Roman forces in 30 BCE, Egypt was officially annexed by Rome, marking the end of an era. Egypt was now just another province in the Roman Empire, though it still played an important role, especially in the empire's grain supply. While Egypt's political independence had been lost, its culture, religion, and art continued to influence the Mediterranean world for centuries. The end of ancient Egypt as an independent civilization came with the defeat of Cleopatra VII and her ally, Mark Antony, by Octavian, later known as Emperor Augustus, in 31 BCE. This was the final chapter of a saga that had lasted for over 3 millennia. The Battle of Actium, where Octavian's forces triumphed, marked the definitive end of the Ptolemaic dynasty and the last pharaoh's reign. Cleopatra, the last ruler of Egypt, committed suicide shortly after the battle, and with her death, Egypt's status as an independent kingdom came to an end. Octavian, now Emperor Augustus, incorporated Egypt into the Roman Empire as a province. Egypt was now ruled directly by Roman governors, but it still retained its cultural significance, particularly in the realms of religion, art, and knowledge. The Roman occupation brought many changes to Egyptian society, but Egypt's ancient traditions, such as the worship of its gods and the importance of its monumental architecture, continued to resonate in the Mediterranean world for centuries.
While Egypt's days of pharaohs and monumental architecture were over, it remained an essential part of the Roman Empire. It provided Rome with grain and other vital resources, maintaining its role as a crucial player in the empire's economy. In fact, many of the great temples and monuments built by the Ptolemies were still used and preserved under Roman rule. However, over time, Egypt's influence in the Mediterranean began to wane, and by the 7th century CE, with the rise of Islamic caliphates, Egypt's Greco-Roman period ended completely. It became part of the Arab-Muslim Empire, further transforming its identity. Despite its fall as a political entity, Egypt's cultural, architectural, and intellectual legacy continued to shape the ancient and medieval worlds. The monumental pyramids, the Sphinx, and the elaborate tombs of pharaohs remained awe-inspiring symbols of Egypt's once mighty civilization. The scientific achievements of ancient Egyptians in medicine, mathematics, and engineering, alongside their philosophical and religious ideas, laid a foundation that would influence civilizations long after Egypt's official demise. So what can we learn from the rise and fall of ancient Egypt? The civilization that lasted for over 3,000 years didn't just fade away because of one reason. It wasn't a single battle, a single political upheaval, or a single invader. No, Egypt's story is a complex weave of triumphs and downfalls, of genius and weakness, of peace and conflict. From the pyramids of the Old Kingdom to the glory of the New Kingdom and the eventual decline under foreign rule, Egypt's journey teaches us about resilience, adaptability, and the constant clash between tradition and change. Egypt's ability to survive through so many eras of turmoil, surviving military invasions, internal strife, and a shifting political landscape, demonstrates the civilization's remarkable strength. Whether it was the control of the Nile's flooding, the role of the pharaohs, or the wealth from trade and conquest, Egypt thrived for thousands of years in ways that are still remarkable to us today. So what do you think made Egypt last so long? Was it the might of the pharaohs, or was it something deeper, maybe the enduring legacy of a culture that valued innovation, art, and religious belief? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more deep dives into history's most fascinating civilizations. Who knows what ancient empire we'll uncover next? Stay tuned and keep exploring history with us.